Okay, our last section of notes deals with mutations. And mutations are any change to your DNA. Um, Sometimes they affect our phenotype directly, and sometimes they do not. So we're going to talk about the different types of mutations and what causes them. So mutation, the word mutation is kind of a generic term because it just means change in DNA. So you can have a mutation that affects a single gene on your chromosome, right? And we know chromosomes have thousands of genes on them. So you could have a mutation that only affects that one particular gene for that one particular protein or trait, but you can also have mutations that can affect an entire chromosome, and those types of mutations are much more impactful. So mutations can happen. They can happen spontaneously due to things that we call mutagens, right? Things that cause the change. Or they can also happen during replication, like a mistake happens during replication. So different types of mutations are, gene mutations. So a specific type of gene mutation where we're simply, and I shouldn't say simply, but where we're substituting one nucleotide for another, that is called a point mutation. So if you look at this image down here, right, our original base was C and G. Well, the mutation replaces that C and G with an A and a U. And if you notice what it does to the amino acid there, it should be glutamine, but with that mutation, it's asparagine. So a point mutation only affects one single amino acid, but that one single amino acid could impact the entire structure of the protein, or maybe it doesn't, but we definitely can have uh, uh, consequences from a point mutation. So point mutations can be silent, a silent mutation, which means they don't cause a big change, like that mutation actually just put the same amino acid in, but they can also cause major change. Now you have other types, right? A frame shift mutation, if you look at this picture over here, we should have leucine, glutamine, serine, asparagine. And over here, if something occurs and we delete that guanine, right? Over here we have AGG right there. Well, if we delete that guanine pair, then what happens now is everything from the point of mutation forward or downstream is going to be different because you've changed the reading frame. So instead of these four amino acids, now you're going to have these two, but then everything else, serine looks like it stays the same, but everything else downstream from that will be different. It could, so clearly you're going to have a completely different protein made. So frame shift mutations definitely have more dire consequences for the protein we're trying to make than a point mutation may. So sometimes mutations affect our phenotype, sometimes they don't. But chromosomal mutations tend to have very big effects on our phenotype. Because a chromosome, again, has thousands of genes on it, well, if you are upsetting a chunk of a chromosome or a whole chromosome, you have, a huge impact. So, when we say chromosomal mutations, I'm talking about things like Down syndrome, which is caused by an extra 21 chromosome, Klinefelter's, which is caused by an extra sex chromosome, Turner syndrome, which is caused by a missing chromosome, Cry-du-Chat, which is caused by a missing number 5. So chromosome mutations have a very big effect. Lots of symptoms or conditions that go along with that. Gene mutations can also change phenotype, like the ones we just talked about, the point and the frame shift mutation, because that mutation could cause a premature stop codon. Like even a point mutation, if we put in the wrong base, it could now be a stop codon, and that's going to mess everything up. That mutation, even though you make a protein, it might change the protein shape. That mutation could also affect how that gene actually gets regulated, and by regulated I mean how does that gene actually get transcribed and translated, and now maybe it can't be transcribed and translated correctly. So mutations can have a large impact. However, there are some that don't affect the phenotype, and like I said before, it could be a silent mutation, meaning that that mutation puts in the same amino acid that should have been there anyway, so it doesn't cause a problem. that mutation could actually be in a non-coding region on the chromosome. We know that there's a lot of space on our chromosomes that don't actually code for traits. So if that mutation is in a non-coding or a non-trait region, then it doesn't affect the phenotype. Or it might not affect how that protein folds or the active site of it. Now, as you grow and age, you may accumulate mutations in your body cells, in your somatic cells, right? If you tan, you are basically, or get a suntan in the summertime, or if you're out exposed to UV light at all, you are accumulating mutations in your DNA, in your somatic cells, because that's what sunlight does to our DNA. So those, however, do not get passed on to your offspring. The only mutations that can be passed on to offspring are those that happen in your sex cells. So any mutation that occurs because of an error in meiosis, not mitosis, but meiosis, so in the production of egg and sperm, can cause a change in the offspring. Could be a harmful one, could be a beneficial one. Now, if there are mutant alleles that are less beneficial, less adaptive for your environment, then the process that we call natural selection takes care of those mutations and removes them from the environment. So if you acquire a mutation that makes your offspring, because it has to be passed down to your offspring, right, makes your offspring less adapted to their environment, or creates a disease or an illness or something that doesn't allow them to live and reproduce, well, that would be natural selection, removing that mutant allele from the population. How do we get mutations? Well, in replication, it can just happen spontaneously because a mistake occurs, and DNA polymerase, as we age, doesn't proofread as well as it does when we're younger, so that can happen. There are mutagens, right, which are things that cause mutations, so UV light, chemicals in water or in our air that somehow get into our bodies. They can cause mutations as well. You've all, heard about the Flint, Michigan lead in the water ongoing issue. That's an example. Lead clearly is an example of a mutagen and a known carcinogen that is in the drinking water there. Cancer drugs also. So we can use this mutation ability for our benefit. And so some cancer drugs are actually have mutagenic properties that cause mutations in cancer cells to kill them.